Good morning. It's June 5th here in Seoul, and I'm Kim Dami. Let's begin with these stories making the headlines at this hour, starting with further efforts by Seoul and Tokyo to soften bilateral ties. Defense chiefs of the two countries met on the sidelines of the Shangri-La Dialogue and agreed to hold working-level talks to prevent a repeat of the 2018 patrol aircraft dispute. Also in Singapore, South Korea and the U.S. agreed to jointly investigate the debris from North Korea's failed satellite launch that fell into the West Sea. And South Korean authorities are still working to retrieve the parts. South Korea advances to the semifinals at the FIFA U20 World Cup after beating Nigeria 1-0 in Argentina. Team Korea will now face Italy on Friday. Russia claims Ukraine has launched its much-anticipated counteroffensive and that it has been repelled. According to the Russian Defense Ministry on Monday, Ukraine on Sunday launched the offensive in the southern Donetsk using 6 mechanized and 2 tank battalions, but the attack has been thwarted. This comes after Moscow declared a victory in Bakhmut following what has been the longest and bloodiest battle since the war began, while Ukraine denies that Russia has full control over the eastern city. While Russia holds swaths of Ukrainian territory in the east, south, and southeast, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said last month that Kyiv needed to wait more for Western military assistance to arrive before launching a counteroffensive. South Korea and Japan have agreed to find ways to prevent a recurrence of a 2018 patrol aircraft dispute. Seoul's Defense Minister Lee Jong-sub and his Japanese counterpart Yasukazu Hamada held talks on the sidelines of the Shangri-La Dialogue in Singapore on Sunday, agreeing to start related talks at the working level without laying out any concrete resolutions. The dispute flared up in December 2018 when a Japanese maritime patrol aircraft flew at an unusually low altitude over a South Korean warship. Tokyo accused the South Korean vessel of having locked its fire control radar on the plane. Now, also in Singapore, during a three-way talks involving U.S. Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin on the previous day, the three defense chiefs agreed to establish a real-time data warning sharing system on North Korean missiles. Asia's premier defense summit, the Shangri-La Dialogue, has come to an end. Our defense correspondent Kim Hyun-sing was in Singapore and filed this wrap-up from the event.
Asia's high-profile defense dialogue took place over the weekend, grabbing headlines across the globe.
This year's Shangri-La Dialogue buzzed with anticipation, with some 600 delegates from roughly 40 countries having gathered to hold major defense talks. There was also a high level of media interest. One of the organizers from IISS earlier said that they were genuinely shocked to see such a large volume of press sign-ups. And this heightened interest seems to have stemmed from rising regional tensions, particularly involving North Korea and China.
North Korean provocations, which have grown increasingly bolder in recent days, stood out as a big talking point.
North Korea developed missiles with various ranges and types and carried out provocations in an unprecedented frequency and intensity from last year to the beginning of this year.
To explore ways to counter North Korean threats, South Korea, the U.S., and Japan held a three-way talk and discussed security cooperation. The brewing conflict between China and the U.S. also took center stage.
People's Republic of China continues to conduct an alarming number of risky intercepts of U.S. and allied aircraft flying lawfully in international airspace.
The Cold War mentality is now resurgent and greatly increases security risks of bloc confrontation in the Asia-Pacific.
Despite this, U.S. Defense Chief Lloyd Austin emphasized that conflict is not imminent nor inevitable. Another persistent concern that drew attention was the prolonged conflict in Ukraine.
Ukraine is sovereign. It is the state that was attacked. That's why the focus for us is to continue to support Ukraine.
This high-profile platform offered an invaluable opportunity for nations to voice concerns, seek understanding, and strive for shared solutions. Kim Hyun-sing, Arirang News, Singapore.
Now, here on the Korean Peninsula, South Korea continues its work today to salvage the wreckage of the North Korean space rocket that crashed into the West Sea last Wednesday. Our Han Seong-woo has more.
Monday marks the 6th day that South Korea's military has been working to search and salvage the wreckage of a North Korean rocket that crashed into the West Sea last Wednesday, following an abnormal flight. The Navy is trying to pull up a 15-meter-long part of the Cheolima-1, which was carrying a military reconnaissance satellite. Once it is retrieved, the wreckage will be jointly examined by South Korea and the United States. According to officials, deep-sea divers made progress in fastening high-strength ropes to the debris on the seafloor, 75 meters below the surface. But the divers had to suspend their work on Sunday due to poor visibility and other unfavorable conditions. Their efforts that day came after regime leader Kim Jong-un's sister, Kim Yo-jong, released a statement lambasting last week's meeting of the United Nations Security Council on the North's failed launch as the most unfair and biased act of interfering in internal affairs. Arguing it infringed on what she called a sovereign state's right to space development, Kim said the meeting ought to be regarded as an insult to and serious distortion of the spirit of the UN Charter. Her displeasure was accompanied by North Korean criticism of the International Maritime Organization's recent adoption of its first-ever resolution condemning North Korean missile launches as a serious threat to the safety of international navigation. An article carried by the North's Korean Central News Agency claimed the IMO had been reduced to a politicized tool under the White House's control, and even hinted that the regime may not notify the organization of future launches, saying the IMO's resolution will be regarded as an official manifestation that the North's advance notice is no longer necessary. Han Seong-woo, Arirang News.
South Korean authorities continue to retrieve the debris of the North Korean space rocket that fell into the West Sea. In the meantime, more rocket-related warnings came out from the north. For more on the latest on the Korean Peninsula, we're joined by Professor Park Guan. Good morning, Professor.
Good morning.
So, like I just mentioned, South Korean military continues its operation to salvage the rocket debris, right? Now, when it is retrieved, how much information about the rocket can we actually find out?
Well, at this moment, we don't know exactly when we can get the retrieve of debris of the rocket. It depends on the weather conditions, and you just have a report. But it is important that it is known that they have around 15 minutes rocket remains. The total height of the Cheolima-1 is 75 minutes, which means that a significant portion is under the sea. So if we, South Korea, successfully retrieve these debris, we can get the very meaningful information. First, we think that we have the PAC-2 engines, which is the most important part of North Korea's the ICBM, intercontinental ballistic missiles, the development, and they have Hwasong-15 and Hwasong-17 allegedly known that these PAC-2 engines, and Cheolima-1 also use the same one, but it's more advanced and revised version. So we can get the more information about that. And second, we of course can get some satellite technology of the North Korea, how it advanced. And finally, we are seeing some parts and items where they are coming from, and some of them might be a violation of the United Nations Security Council resolutions. And year 2012 and 2016, South Korea have experienced to retrieve the debris of the rocket and getting some very meaningful informations.
Right, the rocket itself and also the engine can really speak about how far North Korea has come in space technology. Now, in the meantime, North Korean leader sister Kim Yo-jong once again spoke up. She threatened not to notify the International Maritime Organization when launching a space rocket in the future. Now, the North argues that the international community's treatment of the North over this issue is not fair. Professor Park, what's your take on this?
Well, it's Kim Yo-jong and of course, sister of Kim Jong-un. And she has mentioned the so-called unfairness of the international community that just blamed North Korea. She has started this kind of argument, so-called double standard argument, like 2 years ago. And North Korea, the argument is very straightforward. North Korea said that the weapon development is not different from the other countries, such as South Korea and United States. So it's very totally legal and legitimate. And that's their main argument. So North Korea say that the international community, especially South Korea and United States, should not put the North Korea in the violation of any things. It's a so-called double standard. And second one is that Kim Yo-jong issued this kind of a statement is to give some reasoning and rationale for China and Russia. And of course, those two countries has defended North Korea in United Nations Security Council since the last year. So it should give us some reasoning. And also, you just mentioned that North Korea has announced that they are not going to notify the international IMO, International Maritime Organization, for their next launch. At this moment, I'm not sure whether they are not going to also notify to Japan, which is in the route. And if North Korea decided not to notify Japan, it's going to be a really huge tension and alert and in this region, because it can be, anytime North Korea can launch this rocket, and it will be a very serious security threat to Japan and in some sense South Korea too.
Right. Speaking of notifying the IMO and Japan, we have to talk about the second rocket-carrying satellite, right? When do you think North Korea will actually do so? I mean, should we be expecting one this week? I mean, if it is, why? And from which side this time then?
Well, I think it is very unlikely to launch this week, even though North Korea said that they notified to IMO and Japan is until 11th of this month, because North Korea themselves mentioned the couple of things of why they failed this rocket launch. And they are saying that because of the instability in the engine and fuel system. You see, engine and fuel system, if those two are the problematic, and it means that the whole rocket has a very serious problem. So usually it takes several months and even a year to repair and to see the problems. For example, in year 2012, April, at that time, North Korea has failed to launch the satellite, and it took 8 months to have a second launch, and they said finally they are successful. But we have not included the possibility to the launch missile in a short period of time, because North Korea have a very different route to develop their missiles and weapons. And also, it is Kim Jong-un's very prioritized project. And so I mean that it can be some political reason that North Korea will have a second trial in the very short period of time.
Right, but nonetheless, an emergency UN Security Council meeting did take place over the spy satellite. But of course, this time again, it ended with a no fruitful outcome due to the opposition from China and Russia, as usual now. Will there be any tangible countermeasures or feedback on the global level when there's another launch?
Well, you're right. The United Nations Security Council is simply helpless and dysfunction for the past couple of years. And for example, the last year, March, North Korea's open withdrawal of moratorium. In other words, they launched ICBM, but United Nations Security Council failed to impose any additional sanctions, even though United Nations Security Council Resolution 2397 has a so-called trigger clause. So that's why right now South Korea and United States, Japan, and some other European countries put the unilateral sanction on the North Korea. And recently, South Korea is cooperation with the United States and sanctioned North Korea's hacking organization, so-called Kim Suk-ki. So I think this kind of effort could be continued by these so-called like-minded countries, South Korea, Japan, and the United States.
Right. More unilateral sanctions from Seoul and Washington. Let's see how this goes out to the north this time. Now, thank you so much for joining us this morning, Professor Park Guan.
Thank you.
The South Korean U20 national football team defeated Nigeria 1-0 earlier this morning to advance to the semifinals of the FIFA U20 World Cup. Now, this means the Taeguk Warriors will now face off against Italy on Friday morning. Lee Seung-ja has more.
For the second straight tournament, the South Korea U20 football team has advanced to the semifinals of the FIFA U20 World Cup. The squad, led by head coach Kim Won-jung, defeated Nigeria 1-0 in the quarterfinal match at the Santiago del Estero Stadium in Argentina in the early hours of Monday morning Korea time. After a scoreless 90 minutes, the game was forced into extra time, and it took South Korean defender Choi Seok-hyun only 5 minutes from the restart to find the back of the net, heading in from Lee Seung-won's corner. The young Taeguk Warriors were able to hold on to the lead until the end, despite Nigeria controlling most of the match with 61% of the possession and outshooting South Korea 21-4. But for South Korea, all they needed was their single shot on goal to put them through to the Final Four. With the win, South Korea will now face off against Italy, who defeated Colombia 3-1 in the quarterfinals. Also, with Brazil being knocked out by Israel in the round of 8, South Korea may be confident of bettering its previous best finish as runners-up after losing to Ukraine in the U20 World Cup final in 2019. But head coach Kim Won-jung will need to focus his team for the next game, as Italy is one of the favorites to lift the trophy this year. South Korea will take on Italy in the semi-final on Friday morning at 6 a.m. Korea Standard Time at the La Plata Stadium as they look to advance to their second straight U20 FIFA World Cup final. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
The Ministry of Patriots and Veterans Affairs has been officially launched on Monday, following its upgrade from sub-ministry level to a full-fledged ministry status. Minister Bang Min-sik, the very first head of the ministry, officially began his schedule with a visit to the Daejeon National Cemetery at 8 a.m. to pay respect to the country's martyrs and patriots. An inauguration ceremony will be held on Monday at the Sejong Government Complex, where the minister will reveal the blueprint of the ministry. A new agency tasked with supporting Koreans living overseas will begin operations on the same day. Strawberries have been growing in greenhouses in South Korea since the 1980s and have become a staple winter fruit. Now, the latest variety of strawberries developed by Korean researchers can be enjoyed by fruit lovers all year round and is even being grown overseas. Lee Eun-jin has the story.
Ripening in this greenhouse are red strawberries. The variety that's grown here is a domestic variety named gosul. They are both sweet and sour in taste, and the fruit is very firm. But more than anything, these gosul strawberries are popular with farmers because they can be grown year-round regardless of the season, meaning increased income.
The firm, sweet and sour strawberries are good to eat fresh, but they are also preferred by the cake and bakery industry.
This greenhouse that grows strawberries is in Vietnam. It uses smart farm technology to grow Korean strawberries, including the gosul variety, making them available to Vietnamese farmers.
The Vietnamese farmers praise these strawberries and want to grow them on their own farms. Many of them have already placed advance orders.
Korean strawberries already dominate the domestic market and are also being exported to the United States, Hong Kong, and Southeast Asia. The Rural Development Administration now plans to export domestic strawberries, including the gosul variety, to the Middle East to be grown at local farms there. Lee Eun-jin, Arirang News.
Good morning, I'm Matthew Ashley, and we now turn over to stories from around the world. We begin in the Indian state of Odisha, where an investigation is underway into the cause of a railway collision on Friday that left over 270 people dead and over 800 injured. Now, according to a preliminary investigation, a passenger train was sent onto the wrong tracks due to a signaling error and collided with a stationary goods train. Now, some of the carriages from that passenger train were then hit by another passenger train going in the opposite direction. More than 2,000 people in total were aboard its 2 passenger trains. It's still being determined whether human error played a role in the crash. Now, Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi has promised full treatment for victims of the tragedy and that anyone found guilty would be punished stringently. Search and rescue efforts have ended and the wreckage has been cleared. Now in Hong Kong, authorities have detained more than 30 people over the commemoration of China's Tiananmen Square massacre. Reports say 8 people were arrested in the semi-autonomous city on Saturday, the night before the 34th anniversary of the massacre. Another person was arrested on Sunday for allegedly obstructing police officers, and 23 others were taken into custody for questioning. Many were detained near the city's Victoria Park, where candlelight vigils have been held for decades. The Tiananmen Square massacre in 1989 was a military suppression of student-led pro-democracy protests. It left an unknown number of people dead. Hong Kong was previously the only Chinese city where commemorations had been allowed, but these have been outlawed following a 2020 security law imposed by Beijing. Now, in a move aimed at boosting oil prices, Saudi Arabia will cut oil supplies in July. According to the Saudi Energy Ministry, on Sunday, the country's output will drop to 9 million barrels per day in July from its 10 million barrels per day in May. It's one of the biggest reductions in years and comes amid a larger deal with OPEC Plus to restrict oil supplies in 2024 to stabilize falling oil prices. OPEC Plus is composed of petroleum exporting countries and is largely influential on global oil prices, as it pumps around 40% of the world's crude. And finally, World Cup winner Lionel Messi is bidding farewell to Paris Saint-Germain. The Argentinian lined up for the French League champions for the last time on Saturday in a home game that ended in a shock 3-2 loss to Clermont. Messi's future remains unknown, although lucrative deals in Saudi Arabia and the US MLS are said to be on the table. The weekend also saw Karim Benzema bid farewell to Real Madrid after 14 years at the club. The Frenchman signed off with a goal in the 1-1 draw with Atletico Bilbao on Sunday, or Athletic rather. Now, reports say Benzema is on the move to a Saudi Arabia-based club. And 41-year-old AC Milan forward Zlatan Ibrahimović announced his retirement on the same day, following his club's 3-1 season finale victory over Hellas Verona.
Good morning. Bright skies were welcomed by many over the weekend. There was nothing but sunshine on Saturday with warms. And the new week is kicking off under mostly sunny skies, which will be joined by more clouds later, while East Coast regions will be as hot as yesterday. But there is a chance of passing rain in parts of Gyeonggi-do and Gangwon-do provinces with thunder and lightning, while Jeju Island will see rain from this afternoon into tomorrow with up to 60 millimeters expected, so please keep an umbrella handy. It's a foggy start in many of the western regions, with temperatures starting out similar to slightly higher than Sunday. Highs will be 2 to 3 degrees lower in most parts, topping out at 27 degrees in Chuncheon and Daejeon this afternoon. Now, tomorrow is Memorial Day here in Korea. The weather looks to be a repeat of today's with a chance of isolated showers. Then it will get much hotter by midweek, with morning lows also jumping to the warmer side. Now that's Korea for you, and here's a look at the international weather conditions.
That's all we have at this hour. New Day at Arirang will be back on Wednesday at 9 a.m. Korea time. Until then, goodbye.